is climate change affecting Colombia?
Colombia is one of the most risk countries in terms of many comparisons in the world, because it's a tropical country. It has two oceans. It's part of the Andes. It has the Amazon. It has the Orinoco. And the complexity brings risks and opportunities. Colombia obviously had, for example, the worst floods in years in 2010 and 2011. And it represented more or less 2% of the GDP of Colombia. So when you think about risks, we already lived through it. We have El Niño effects, we have La Niña effects, we have droughts, we have rains, we have slides, we have everything in the country. And we have a population of around 48 million people living in those areas. So if you speak about complexity, you speak about Colombia. If you speak about opportunities, you speak about Colombia.
What's happening in Colombia to tackle climate change?
Well, we've learned, because we have had, this series of events, rains and droughts, etc., for many years now. And so Colombia has a strategy for climate change. It has also a RED program, a financial program, and a very robust adaptation program. Because even though Colombia is not emitting as other countries in the world, we are suffering in terms of adaptation. We have to adapt in many ecosystems, with many people and in many situations.
Where do you see the most progress being made on climate-compatible development? And take us a little to the ground level and some of the projects and programs that you've been working on.
Well, I see Colombia wants to have real examples in adaptation. Mainly, we have a lot of programs in mitigation. But as I tell you, 80% of the energy system of Colombia is hydro. So we're obviously the fifth country in terms of producing coal in the world, but we export the emissions. Otherwise, we don't, produce them. So we're mainly focused on adaptation, and that's what the government wants. And there's very few resources for adaptation. Most of the donors would like to do mitigation type of things. So CDKN is there providing the answer to the government. They want to do 6 territories and 6 sectors. That's their development plan for the 4-year governmental period. And we are doing exciting things. We're doing an adaptation plan for Cartagena, which is the first city in Colombia to ever do an adaptation plan. We're doing an adaptation plan and a vulnerability analysis for the agricultural sector. And that's in a region of Colombia that produces most of the food, where we have big industries, where we have coffee, we have sugarcane, we have plantains, we have fruits. And so how could you envision adaptation in a rural environment of Colombia, and to assure that we're producing the right products in the future? That's the main target of the agricultural sector now in Colombia, and we're helping doing that. And the other very exciting project is about transport. Colombia lacks infrastructure. We're lagging behind. We only have 15% of the infrastructure we should have. So the Colombian government is investing a lot in building this new infrastructure, and we want to make it a resilient infrastructure. We want to make sure that the roads that are being built today are the roads of the future, that they will last, that will foster competitiveness, and that they're cost efficient. So that's what we're doing in terms of climate change. And we're also seeing something that is very complex, and it's climate migrants or climate displaced people. And we have seen that because in the floods of 2010, we had several populations flooded and we had climate displacement. So we're understanding what climate displacement is and how can we help the people. It's not only about infrastructure, but it's also about the people. How do they survive? How do they feel in those situations? How will they adapt in the future? Which these will become obviously more frequent.
Tell us a bit more about the city of Cartagena. What are the city's major assets and how are they at risk from climate change? And what do your adaptation plans do to address those?
Okay, we found that in Cartagena, the INVEMAR institution, which is the Institutions of Research for Oceans and Coast in Colombia, had produced a wonderful report on the vulnerability of the coastal cities of Colombia. And Cartagena was the most vulnerable one, and nothing had been done. So what we did with CDKN, we sort of took out the study and elevated it to the policy making. We're doing the adaptation plan for Cartagena, which is no longer an adaptation plan by itself, but it's a climate change plan, including mitigation and adaptation. Both options is climate compatible development. And we're working with the mayor and with around 17 institutions in Cartagena, including the private sector, to envision the future of Cartagena. We began doing this project. The private sector was a little bit reluctant because they didn't want to hear they were going to be flooded, because they think that message sort of avoids competitiveness. We changed the message, and we now said that we want to be climate compatible and competitive in the future of Cartagena. And that's what we're doing. We have 5 axes right now. We're thinking about ports. We're thinking about the industrial area of Cartagena, which is huge. We're thinking about the tourism sector, the ecological structure of Cartagena in general, and we selected an adapted neighborhood. We cannot change Cartagena because it's huge, but we can select one pilot neighborhood where we can make a difference. And together with the mayor, we have already selected a neighborhood that is called Boston to work in a very precise sort of, or a very concrete neighborhood to understand what we're speaking about. How could that be adapted?
Can you tell me a bit more about the climate change impacts on Cartagena? How are the people being affected at present when there are extreme weather events? And what kinds of solutions do you envisage putting in place to mitigate those?
Right. If you see Cartagena, Cartagena is a Spanish city. It has walls. You know, the old city in Cartagena has walls, and it has walls to protect themselves, but I also think that to protect from the weather and the ocean, which was not as near as it is right now, because they reclaimed land around that city. And so it's naturally is not well done, you know, and the ocean is claiming what they took away. So with the situation of climate change and the vulnerability analysis done by INVEMAR, we have seen that around 30% of the city will be flooded. And also there are situations where water is coming in because of flooded years. And you already see they don't have drainage systems, they don't have real channels to avoid water going in and out. They already have problems. And apart from that, they have other type of problems. They destroyed the mangroves. The coral reefs around Cartagena are also endangered. So the ecological system of Cartagena is really endangered. And all that situation has created sort of a chaotic city in terms of vulnerability. So we have to rethink the city. We have to rethink the planning process of the city. We have to rethink where to build the new neighborhoods, how maybe to displace people to other areas in the city. We have to rethink how to build mangroves, how to create, you know, humid areas in general, how to see the ecological system working in Cartagena. And obviously on top of that, you have new industries, you have new tourism sectors, so you have all the hotels of the world coming to Cartagena and obviously, you know, being placed in the front line of the ocean, which will be flooded. You see the port that accounts for 60% of the trade of Colombia. So this is a city that accounts everything. It has tourism, it has an industry sector, it has a port, it has to reclaim the ecological system, and it has to have a vision for the future if it wants to be competitive.
Are you ultimately optimistic or pessimistic that climate change action like this and development and poverty reduction on the other hand can go forward in tandem successfully?
Absolutely, but this is a complex situation. When you envision, for example, Cartagena, you think that is a rich city because most of the people fly in to very luxurious hotels. But in reality, 80% of the population in Cartagena are poor. And obviously they're the most vulnerable. So when we thought about this plan, you know, somehow rich people can adapt easily, but these 80% of the population of Cartagena won't be able to adapt. So that's why we're doing an adapted neighborhood. We want to understand what that means. How can we think of Cartagena in the year 2050? How can we drive competitiveness? How could we assure that people have a good living in Cartagena.
Do you think ultimately you're optimistic or pessimistic that climate compatible development can be achieved? Poverty reduction on the one hand, real climate change action on the other?
Yes, but it's complex because obviously Colombia is still willing to be a developed country, you know. We're joining the OECD. We want to assure green growth, but we're still dependent on, for example, mineral resources, petroleum, etc., to drive our growth. We're not thinking about climate compatible development because that's sort of a second option, you know, a second priority for the country at this stage. We're also passing through a peace process, and we're thinking, what will be Colombia in the future with peace? And that's, I think, the main priority of Colombia. So for that, agriculture, rural development, growth, green growth, climate compatible development, they will all be part of the equation. And I think we have to look for the future of Colombia in terms of green growth and climate compatible development, thinking together to build a new country, to give opportunities to the poor, to the rural communities, to drive competitiveness, and to assure that having all the opportunities, all the ecosystems, all the people that we have, we will drive a different type of economy, a different type of development that is more resilient, that is more green, and that looks for the Colombians of the future.